According to Kotler, one aim for place marketing is to promote a place's values and image so that potential users are fully aware of its distinctive advantages. And Ashworth defines its purpose as maximising the efficient social and economic functioning of the area concerned in accordance with whatever wider goals have been established. Ashworth states place marketing began to be considered in earnest from the 19th century as market competition became globalised. Tourism and a need to differentiate places in order to both sell and maintain them as unique locations sped along the place marketing practice. Industry has been a driving force behind the marketing of towns and cities, and Ward notes how competing cities would attract manufacturing and industrialists through incentives. Place marketing is no longer confined to the pursuit of industries, but that's not to say it doesn't play an important role, with DMOs presenting their cities as ones of science, innovation, or hubs for creative industries. Economic globalisation has boosted the focus on the competitiveness of places. Braun defines place, or city marketing, as the coordinated use of marketing tools supported by a shared customer-oriented philosophy for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging urban offerings that have value for the city's customers and the city's community at large. More and more, place marketing is focused on place reinvention. It is generally recognised that urban planning and design strategies are seen as important features of place marketing, including the repackaging of industrial areas as cultural districts. Place branding is an element within place marketing that involves influencing people's ideas by forging particular emotional and psychological associations with a place. Branding has become a central concept for promoting local competitiveness. Manchester's post-industrialisation regeneration since the 1990s has been a success story, and the marketing of the city as a place of cosmopolitan loft living has seen city centre residential figures rocket from a few hundred in the 1980s to over 50,000 today. The vision of the local council was focused on the repopulation of the centre with a high-spending population and a conscious encouragement of food, drink and culture. However, elements of this repackaging and regeneration had detrimental effects on particular neighbourhoods, and the arrival of the Arndale shopping centre in the mid to late 1970s was the final death knell for the Oldham Street area, today the Northern Quarter. Many of the large shops and department stores that had been based in the area moved to the Arndale, leaving behind a string of empty retail premises. The area became increasingly unloved and abandoned, and was considered to have no future or value. One local business owner likened the building of the Arndale to a recentering of the city, saying, "Everything changed when town was moved." The origin of the Northern Quarter as an informal cultural quarter emerged in the early 1990s as a result of the success in the area of Affleck's Palace, a retail emporium, followed by Dry Bar, building on the presence of live music venues in the area. In 1994, Manchester City Council funded a feasibility study into the future development of the area. A bottom-up approach was adopted in recruiting a local study team who were familiar with the area. The report recommended an extension of the area's pop culture retail base and an increase in the number of people living in the area. Those involved in the Northern Quarter were deeply committed to the idea of the local, not global. What followed was a very loose branding exercise as part of a council-devised vision. As pointed out by Grimsey, visions are rarely captured as a document, so it's not a process that can easily be followed, replicated or evaluated. The Northern Quarter Regeneration Study report suggested that creative uses should be encouraged by cultural animation, stimulating existing liveliness, identity and vibrancy through public art. Public art may form part of wider promotional elements of city activity that has become necessary as a result of competition between cities globally for investment. The Tib Street Trail, a public art scheme, was intended to develop works that could express and reflect the unique cultural identity of the area and that involved local people. The scheme was coordinated by lead artist Liam Curtin and was managed by a partnership of the City Council and the Northern Quarter Association, a self-organised group of 130 members drawn from the major stakeholders within the area. They also created a quarterly newsletter, a radio station, an annual street festival, and orchestrated the conversion of several premises for cultural, voluntary sector and educational uses. Specific elements of the branding exercise included street signs, ceramic works, a DIY-style fountain and a neon light tower. The theme for the scheme was warp and weft, inspired by woven cloth in the textiles trade. The flagship brand creation was Cypher, a unique font created for the area by Tim Rushton. The font can be seen on ceramic street signs across the district. Public art-based reinvigoration is a critical component of wider regeneration strategies that seek to improve image by means of branding. Branding in this context is seen to potentially provide a link between individual and collective identities and to imbue localities with a sense of belonging. An important innovation of the scheme was its extremely flexible approach to commissioning the physical brand attributes, or the art. The process was very unusual, as was the elaborateness of the public consultation measures. According to McCarthy, the branding was useful in creating a new conception of what's appropriate for the built environment of the Northern Quarter, and he states that the public art scheme, in its innovation and encouragement of local participation, would seem to have contributed to a reorientation of image. In terms of my personal practice, that of a tour guide, I followed the bias towards subculture and promoting independent traders and artists, and I tell the story of this branding exercise as part of the tours. In doing so, I ask groups to consider how the area came to be and what it stands for, cutting through the more modern notion of it being purely a district for bar culture. I market my tours, globally known as anti-tours, to residents rather than tourists. However, the same can't be said of other guides within the field. Since 2008, there's been a considerable increase in guiding within the area. Often there are up to 10 large tour groups at once, diluting that alternative feel with an influx of free tours, pub tours, and Instagram-driven tourists and sightseers, none of which seem to be temporally staggered, leading to a huge arrival of tourists all at once. By telling the story of the Northern Quarter's origins and encouraging my groups to consider how we can improve the district in future, I hope to generate continued interest in joining community groups such as the Northern Quarter Forum, who in many ways have carried the torch of the original Northern Quarter Association. Controlling the tourism market requires some external intervention, and it would be beneficial for Visit Manchester to offer training and guidance in staggering tour times, mixing up start and end points, and creating new routes to avoid clashing with that unique sense of place and the neighbourhood's eclectic spirit. The success of the Northern Quarter today is demonstrable through reputation, footfall, and through its aesthetic appeal to the modern consumer and influencer market. The public art of the Northern Quarter suggests that it's feasible to integrate aims in relation to image and identity by means of public art, and that the use of historical associations can provide a valuable means of linking image and identity with the Warp and Weft brand, promoting place image and enhancing local identity. Warp and Weft was a co-creation between the broadest group of stakeholders, including grassroots forums, that perfectly captured the landscape as one of shared memories. By pinning the brand to the area's textile and market heritage, the Northern Quarter has organically grown around that, and its residents and businesses have maintained a strong hold on the autonomy they were granted during the branding process. This autonomy has in itself become the brand, but has also led to a poorly maintained environment and significant element of heritage neglect. An issue with being so bottom-up in approach is a lack of public sector resources for urban design projects and environmental improvements. Rather than forming a part of the branding process, the public art developed for the Northern Quarter became the entirety of the process. Any brand imagery created, notably the unique fonts developed for the street signs, was not widely adopted, with only 2 local businesses choosing to use the font within their own branding. The process has produced improvements in the urban public realm and has contributed to the development of a greater and more positive sense of place in the area, but many seating areas and the larger public artworks have since been removed, including landmark pieces. Grand ideas to create a striking gateway at the former fish markets were sacrificed in favour of privatising the space for apartments. The branding exercise was cut short and assumed to have served its purpose in attracting investors. As a result, the council backtracked on the overall vision to ultimately dilute the boundaries of the area and internalise it somewhat from visitors. This left many stakeholders frustrated and feeling exploited. Despite this, in many ways, it did at least maintain the alternative and independent culture of the area and allowed visitors a feeling of discovery. It was an absence of planning and regulation that allowed the metamorphosis of the Northern Quarter from an area of decline to an area of pop culture diversity. Today, though, the area is so renowned that these discrepancies in public realm improvements, lack of public space, and a failure to maintain the original architecture or general appearance beyond the core food and drink zones has led to a downtrodden appearance. Creating a pleasant environment has not been a priority, and the back streets of the area have decayed and festered and serve as examples of the broken window phenomenon, where visible signs of crime, antisocial behaviour and civil disorder create an urban environment that encourages further crime and disorder. This is perhaps most superficially demonstrated through the amount of graffiti and litter. The brand of the Northern Quarter is lost amongst internal competition, and new landmark sites such as the opening of the Mackimare Food Hall have failed to adopt any of the brand attributes. The recent arrival of a Northern Quarter online guide has not aligned itself with this image either, rather with its own parent company image, Manchester's Finest, a sleek hospitality-focused brand that pushes the Northern Quarter as a food and drink destination rather than a creative neighbourhood, and functions with its own corporate interests at heart rather than the community's. The place marketing and branding of the Northern Quarter was so reliant on the local voices that, in line with today's methodologies, this element of it can perhaps be viewed as a success, in fact something of a market leader, as the bottom-up is rarely undertaken. However, the guidance from the council was not there to allow the brand to continue into the future. Referring to the 7 issues which Ashworth identified as significant for the future of place marketing, we can see that only 2 of the 7 points were really addressed, and whilst we can currently rely on the nighttime economy to bring a steady footfall to the Northern Quarter, it's not tenable to suggest this will carry the area forward indefinitely. There's a lot more work to do in place marketing and branding if we're to manage the area as a livable and desirable neighbourhood for the future.